This has been a long time coming. I've been wanting to do this for a few years now. I think it's been really urgent, I think, for me to get going with it in the last few months. And that is becoming comfortable, the podcast. The point of this, and this is the first episode, so I'm basically kind of spitballing out loud to myself. Gonna do a few takes of that, or maybe just one, because I want this to be as raw as possible, the whole podcast. I basically have this idea that I want to do, which is to have conversations with people about really any subject that is important to them or to me or to people in general. And the idea for this is that there's lots of things in the world that aren't comfortable, right? The one that really promoted this podcast in my mind that made me want to do this was climate change. Like we all kind of know that there's stuff going on that's not okay. And that can be climate change, it can be anything else, but that's the one that got me because I spent a few years very invested in researching and understanding it, and then sort of came out the other end being like, well, there's not too much I can do other really than trying to get organized with people. And at that time in my life I didn't really have the space to actually do that effectively because of entering a new family and studying and trying to build a business and lots of both real things and self-limiting things. I'm sort of afraid to get arrested and things like this because it might have impact on my future. And I'm sure many people are in this boat. They want to do something, they don't really know what. And so, as a result of that tension, we just kind of become comfortable living our lives with what is uncomfortable. I am not comfortable with climate change and the society and system that promotes it and at the same time denies it. Um, it's a problem. And yet we all go to work, we drive our cars, we buy stuff wrapped in plastic, we do all these things that are known to be destructive or at least seriously problematic. And yet we live fairly comfortably. People say this is the most safe and comfortable era that humans have ever lived in material terms. And I think that's true from my understanding of history and what's out there. It seems accurate, not for everyone, but for many people, and more people are trying to access this. And part of the problem, of course, is how the system is built doesn't make that sustainable. So yeah, sustainability and climate change was kind of the basis for this idea. Being comfortable with the uncomfortable, becoming comfortable with what's not okay or what is difficult. But it opens up this question to so much more. It opens up the question of, both how do we get comfortable with these things? And some of that is, of course, trying to change things or trying to act on things or trying to change ourselves. Um, and the other side is how we just create this cognitive dissonance, this element of our minds that just kind of tucks it away or rationalizes it or moves it around. And I wanted to have conversations about these things because they're all essential. Part of the climate solution is social justice. Social justice means that there is um, the freedom and equality of all to access, you know, things in a fair way, right? And to not be discriminated against unfairly, right? And of course, the justice element is that the people who are causing problems are held accountable. But of course, we're all creating problems by just being part of the system. And again, that accountability is sort of lacking. There's a lot of stuff you look on Instagram that will try to get you to buy sustainable things. But if you're poor or haven't had an income or aren't uh, aware of these things, they're not going to be available, or they're not going to be available, but either financially or cognitively, you know, you won't see them, be exposed to them. Um, and of course, they're not really embedded within a system to begin with. So it all comes down to this individual action, which is ineffective in comparison to the system at large, which is so much more caught up in its own inertia, in its own momentum, um, in its own priorities. So yeah, I wanted to be part of the conversation, and this was the idea that I wanted to bring to it. And I'm spitballing out loud here because, again, I want it to be a fairly human interaction, you know, not a perfect one, not a highly edited one, but just a human interaction, because that's all we are really, is just these humans trying to figure stuff out or trying to live our lives, and that's fine. But the conversations are interesting and worthwhile, so I wanted to be having them, whatever they might be. And some of the subjects that I've got in mind are more sort of philosophical, some are more psychological, some are more societal. Um, you know, but really it's about anything that is interesting, that is worth talking about. And of course, everything is worth talking about. So the point is really to talk about everything, but with people that are interested in those subjects. And hopefully that will create an interesting listen for whoever wants to listen to this. So I'm going to get going with sort of the structural element of this show. So the point for me is, of course, having a conversation about becoming comfortable, and either that is how we become comfortable, or it's about how we have become comfortable with what is not comfortable. It's sort of both angles, but really it'll cover a lot of other things. But because that's big, that's kind of infinite, I've decided to create a somewhat of a limitation. So the limitation is there's going to be up to 3 guests with me. So I'll host it, and there'll be up to three guests, between 1 and 3. And there'll be 6 questions. And those 6 questions are things that I've decided that I have not prepared the other person for. In this case, I have 6 questions for myself, which I have prepared, but then I forgot about them, and I'm coming back to it now because I want to get started. And I've been putting this off, and I want to get started, so I'm getting started. And those 6 questions are to be answered within a kind of 2-hour window. So it'll ideally be sort of floating around an hour long per episode. And then if it's longer, it's longer. If it's less, it's less. But ideally, that kind of zone, sort of, you know, an hour to 2 hours. So I'll get started with my questions, because 10 minutes in, there's 50 minutes left. So I don't know. Let's see how it goes. But the first question is, how comfortable are you with becoming comfortable? And I think I mean that in the sense of like the podcast, the idea, or just creating a podcast. And if I'm honest, I'm not sure. Like, I want to be, like I said, part of the conversation. I want to have a reason and an outlet to meet people and talk about these things. I have a lot of investment in the idea and its potential value, both to listeners, to myself, and, you know, just as a product or as a project, you know, that this might be worthwhile. And I hope that it is. But there's this kind of problem I have with the exposure, with the public space, the public domain. And I think it's the idea that, you know, you look on social media, you look on really anywhere, and people who have exposure are then in the public domain. What they say is in the public domain. It can be tracked back. It can be held on them. And that idea of accountability that I talked earlier is essential. But in a system where it's very difficult to regulate what is being said back and try to, make that fair or kind or decent, it's very difficult to get that. So there's this sense of vulnerability in beginning the project, in putting myself in that space. But of course, it's necessary if I want to do something like this and have a reason to have these conversations and have a structure for those conversations, then I need to be putting myself in a public space. So there's kind of I'm not perfectly comfortable with that. I'm excited. I'm excited for it, but I'm also nervous about the potential implications, what that might mean. Um, I'm just going to silence this because I don't want it buzzing all the way through. Um, and that's kind of a good example of something I want to talk about is phones, right? How comfortable are we with phones and how much they dominate our experience of being alive now? But silencing it is good, so I'm doing that. The second question is what is the purpose of the show slash podcast? And I've kind of outlined that already. I really want it to be a space to have conversations about things that matter or are part of the human condition. Like some of the more philosophical, psychological ones, I guess, are kind of life and death and childbirth and parenthood, um, fear, things that we all experience individually, but that are uniquely different, and that each of us has something unique that we've learned that's either part of the problem or part of the quote unquote solution, how to live well with these things, how to live comfortably without being blind or intentionally ignorant of these things. And to have a space where that can be made human, where that can be made accessible and approachable and okay for it to not be known, okay for it to not be comfortable, and yet okay to be talked about, even if we're not the perfect expert in that field. Because the more I know about everything I know about, the less I feel like I know enough to call myself more of an expert than anyone else. That's not to say that I'm not potentially an expert in my field, or that you need to be an expert in your field to have an opinion. It's just that that's not really the point. The point isn't about who knows best or who has the right answer. It's not at all about that. It's about how we deal with it, how individual people, how we as individuals deal with these themes, with these ideas, with these problems, with these experiences. I want to talk about racism, for example, and I, being white, do not have a perfect experience of racism, or even any experience of racism, depending on how you understand the concept and what it means to you or to whoever thinks about it. And it's a sensitive subject to dive into, especially for a fairly privileged white man, right? All forms of discrimination that I haven't experienced but do want to talk about, put me in what feels like a somewhat vulnerable position because I'm exposing my ignorance, I'm exposing my prejudice, and yet I want to ask questions. I want to be part of the conversation, and I want to experience fear without letting it stop me from being human, from being myself. And maybe that's the point of this, is to encourage and promote as many people as want to be able to live that way that I'm trying to live, not with the arrogance, but with the sense of it's okay to be afraid, and it's probably better to do stuff anyway, especially if it matters to you, and to you genuinely, not to some idea of you or some other person that you're trying to please, but you. And this matters to me, and there's a few other things I'm trying to work on that are difficult in the same way that this is difficult, for the same reasons that it's all about sort of not wanting to be inadequate, I suppose, rejected, stupid, things that are that I think many people share, and that's what would hold them back. At some point, you've got to stop. You've got to do it anyway. You've got to try, even if it's not perfect, even if there's buzzing and slurping and blowing your nose, and messy hair and whatever else comes with the territory of being human. Um, so that's the point. That is the purpose of the podcast. The next question is how do you want to record it and why? I'm thinking because I want it to be fairly raw and I don't have that much experience of podcasting, being the first episode of my first podcast. Um, I think I'm just gonna do it on like Zoom because or Google Meets or something like this because the recording software is there, the quality is there, the encryption's there. It's all, it's all available. Uh, and hopefully it'll bypass any problems of having to meet up or having to have expensive equipment. I've got a mic, but it's nothing special. It's just a basic mic, and hopefully it's good enough for this. And again, it's kind of more about the conversation about humanness than it is about the high production level. I mean, I want it to be a good production level. I want it to be enjoyable to listen to or watch. I'm recording this at the same time on video so that there is something there, and hopefully that'll become usable as we go along. Uh, I guess the why is why do I want it to be recorded? It's an interesting question to me, right? Like theoretically, there's no reason to have this be public. I could just try to find a way to talk to people and have interesting conversations. Um, why do I want it to be recorded? Why do I want it to be listened to? And I'm not sure. I think there's elements of wanting to expand the network, sort of my sense of access to. I don't know if I want to be influencing. I don't really like the idea. Um, but I definitely want to be in a larger pool of people. And I feel like it's very difficult to justify the time that I'm hopefully going to be asking people to give me without there being something for, to show for it that comes out of it that is going to either promote them or me or the subject or you know a lot of things at the moment are kind of about reach, right? Like who is this going to reach? What's the point of this if it's not going to reach people? Because otherwise it's just a conversation in a room with an individual, which is a good thing. We all want to have interesting conversations with individuals, right? But if it's not reaching people, then how much impact is it going to have? How helpful would it be to people? Um, and I think there's probably, of course, like a selfish or opportunist element to it. Like this will hopefully help me, right? This will hopefully help me get some learning for myself. The conversations, the meetings themselves will hopefully be interesting and rewarding and enriching for me personally. That is the goal. It is basically because I find it interesting. And I hope other people will find them interesting as well, but I can't predict that. So I've just got to start with what I want, with what I care about, with what I would find exciting or inspiring. So that's what I'm gonna do. And the other element, of course, is I want visibility because I want to be successful in my own right as well. and I hope other people feel that that is understandable. That it's not to put myself above others, it's just to put myself in community with others. And for that to be rewarding for anyone and everyone who is invested in the conversation, in the exercise, in the experience of this. Um, and I think that might be enough of a reason to get started, just because I want to and I find it exciting and hopefully rewarding in many different ways. Um, and again, hopefully not just for me, but maybe just for me is enough to start. Who knows? The next question, question 4, is why did you start wanting to do this podcast? I've outlined that again with the climate problem. I've wanted to do podcasting or some form of creative content for a while. I have a friend that I was trying to do a graphic novel with, um, and it turns out to be very difficult to do things in a team, not because of any reason in particular, but you need to keep that momentum going, right? It's not just about the idea; it's about consistently moving forward all the time, and it's easier to do that independently. And this would be independent. I don't need any other person to get it started. I just need to keep myself going, to keep finding people and interesting subjects and interesting questions, and then meeting them and then having a 2 hour conversation with them. And I want to do that. I don't need to wait for other people. Um, and I think a lot of jobs that are a problem for me are kind of about not being able to have your own momentum, because you're waiting for other people to green light or something like this, or to do their part of the puzzle, because you're not just alone. And that's of course going to be an issue here. I need to find people who are willing to do to join me. And this can take time. There's no rush. I mean, there's a rush in the sense that I want to do it and I want it to start now. But hopefully there'll be enough of a pool that if people don't show up, then that's okay, you know. Um, but I wanted to do some form of conversation, some kind of podcast for a while. And I think this is the best idea that I have. It's the one that keeps coming back to me, and it's the one that I really want to get to work on. So I'm going to start working on it, and that's my plan. Um, the fifth question, because I don't have so much more to say about the fourth, is what do you hope and expect for the show? And again, sort of been mentioned, but I really hope that it'll be its own community, its own space where people will be like, oh man, I liked this conversation about death. And how about we have a conversation about this, some other thing, you know, um, so that it gets its own momentum, so that it becomes a really interesting place for commentary or discussion. And I'm not sure how much that kind of to and fro between me and the listener is gonna happen, because I want to keep it fairly simple, I think, so that it doesn't become too overwhelming, um, as a as a part of my life, because it is one part of my life, um, that I want to very much be dedicated to, but not overwhelmed by. Uh, so I'm gonna that's gonna be like a work in progress about how to balance everything and how that will work. But hopefully it'll just be like a really engaging place and respectful, ground rules of decency and respect. That is my ground rules for how I want to be with people. Not an expert, not perfect, but just have decency and respect, self-respect and respect of other. Because that way there's the possibility for conversation and discussion and difference, not for confirmation and validation. Because that's not what I'm after. I'm after the conversation, not for us to just be either ridiculing each other or promoting our own ideas. There's this idea, I think, that nature tends towards diversity, and it seems to, unless we change the conditions to make it suit us better, which of course we have over the last few hundred years, tried to make the world suit us better and reduce diversity as a result. But nature tends towards diversity, and balance comes from that diversity. We can see that the problem of climate change is a lack of balance because of that intentional movement to make the world suit one species, us, which is, again, understandable. It is what I think most animal systems would do. They would try to tweak the conditions, and most animals can't, or to our knowledge can't. And so we don't see that. They have to live according to the conditions that they are born into, and the balance of food and shelter and sleep and all the basic needs. But humans haven't got that exact condition. We are born into a system that is far more complicated than we can actually have an individual impact on globally. You can't cut any of the branches of the system just like that. But we all contribute to it in unique and varying ways. But globally, it is about being comfortable. Most animal life is about being comfortable. So it's not, in this case, the conversation isn't about being comfortable. The conversation is about understanding and promoting those concepts of respect and diversity, of opinion, of view, of perspective, of difference, a respect for difference. Not so that we can all share the same opinion eventually, the right opinion, because of course there's no such thing, but just so that we are more complex, we are more layered, because we have had access to that difference, to those alternative views, those alternative possibilities for how to see ourselves, the world, others, whatever it might be. And I think that's what I'm hoping. Expect is a strong word. I don't know what I expect from the show. Hopefully conversation that is engaging. Even that's hope. I can't expect anything. But I do hope for that. And I'm gonna be working towards that. So that's what I'm hoping to deliver. And question 6, which is the last question, it's going to be a short episode, I suppose, is where do we go from here? So my plan to go from here is to start getting people I know, or people online, or people that I'm going to reach out to be willing to sit down with me and have these conversations. And some of it will be an absolute epic fail, and and I'm looking forward to that because I want to learn and I want to get better at this. So, you know, again, out of respect for myself, I'm going to give myself that opportunity. And out of respect for others, I'm going to invite them into the project, which is becoming comfortable. So I look forward to either hearing from you or to your listenership or to whatever comes next from this. And we'll start from there. Until then, I'll see you next time. Bye.